I know something's wrong the second I pull into the parking lot and see the lights still off in the dispatch wing. It's 6:47 on a Monday morning and those lights should have been on since 6. They're never off at 6. I've been the first car in this lot for 11 years, and in 11 years, those lights have always been on before me. My name is Dale Kowalczyk. I'm 52 years old, and for the past 11 years I've been the Senior Logistics Coordinator for Meridian Cold Chain Solutions, a regional freight and temperature-controlled distribution company that moves perishable goods, pharmaceuticals, fresh produce, frozen food, medical supplies, across 7 states in the upper Midwest. On any given day, we've got about 340 drivers on routes, 18 distribution hubs, and somewhere north of 4,200 active client accounts. When a hospital in Duluth needs insulin delivered at 2 in the morning and the temperature logger on truck 77 starts showing a drift, I'm the one who gets the call. I'm also the one who built the system that catches the drift before it becomes a crisis. The system I run isn't pretty. It's not some shiny SaaS platform with a mobile app and a dashboard that looks like something from a science fiction movie. It's a routing and compliance engine I've been building in pieces since my first year here, layered on top of a legacy TMS that our original CTO wrote back when the company had 12 trucks and 2 employees who knew what TMS even stood for. I've written custom scripts that cross-reference delivery windows against weather data, flagged non-compliance before auditors ever show up, and built temperature variance alerts that have saved us from FDA regulatory action at least 4 times that I can prove and probably twice more that I can only suspect. The pharmaceutical logistics alone would make your head spin if you've never dealt with it. You've got your chain of custody requirements, your DEA controlled substance manifests, your 21 CFR Part 11 documentation. You've got clients whose contracts specify temperature tolerances down to half a degree Celsius. And if your truck runs warm for 15 minutes during a 300-mile run, you don't just lose the shipment, you lose the client. And sometimes you lose your operating license in that state. I know which of our refrigeration units runs a quarter degree warm above 40 miles per hour in crosswinds. I know which dock at our Eau Claire hub has a loading door that doesn't seal right when the temperature drops below 15 degrees and needs to be shimmed before a pharmaceutical run. That's not documented anywhere. That's in my head, the same way the location of every pothole in your neighborhood is in your head after 11 years of driving the same streets. So when the company got acquired by Northstar Distribution Holdings 8 months ago and their VP of Operations started talking about operational modernization, I paid attention. These things happen. I've seen it at other places. New ownership comes in. They want their fingerprints on everything. They want to feel like they earned whatever they paid for the acquisition. Usually it means some new software nobody asked for, and a few consultants who bill $400 an hour to tell you what your employees already know for free. What I didn't expect was my new VP's son. The VP's name is Weston Farr. He's the kind of executive who has never personally loaded a truck but who has very strong opinions about loading efficiency. He showed up for his first site visit in a Range Rover wearing a vest that probably cost more than my monthly truck insurance, walked around the dispatch floor for about 25 minutes, and then wrote a memo about redundant process architecture that I'm still trying to parse 8 months later. He asked me exactly one question on that visit. He looked at my workstation. 2 monitors, a terminal window, about 6 spreadsheets open, and the routing dashboard I built running in the background. And he said, "Is all of this really necessary?" I told him yes. He nodded the way people nod when they've already decided the answer is no. The meeting where everything changed happened on a Wednesday. Weston called me in along with our HR director, a woman named Pat who's been with the company for 16 years and has the expression of someone who has seen everything and expects nothing good from any of it. She gave me one of those looks when I sat down across from Weston's desk, the kind of look that says, "I'm sorry," and also, "Please don't shoot the messenger." Weston was looking at something on his laptop. He didn't look up when I came in. "Dale, we've been reviewing your department." Okay. Northstar is committed to a cloud-first infrastructure strategy. Part of that means we're consolidating logistics management onto a unified platform. He turned the laptop around to show me a slide deck. It had a lot of blue gradients and the word synergy in the first 3 slides. We're bringing in someone who's going to lead that transition. Who? I asked, though my stomach had already told me the answer. That's when the door opened and a young man came in. 27, maybe 28. He had the handshake of someone who'd practiced handshakes. His name was Caden, and he was Weston Farr's nephew. He had a master's degree in supply chain management from a well-regarded university in Ohio. He had an internship with a third-party logistics firm in Columbus. He had a laptop bag that had never been near a loading dock in its life. And he explained with the quiet confidence of someone who has never been wrong about anything because nothing he's tried has ever been tested in the real world. Built a comprehensive logistics optimization solution using a combination of Microsoft Excel, Power Automate, and a free tier API from a weather data provider. I want to be very precise about what he said next because I've replayed it in my head many times since. It's fully automated, Caden said. The routing logic is in Excel. Power Automate handles the triggers. The weather overlay pulls from the API every 4 hours. I've tested it extensively against historical data and the efficiency gains are significant. I looked at Weston. Weston had the expression of a proud uncle. I looked at Pat. Pat was studying the surface of the conference table with great interest. When you say historical data, I said, trying to keep my voice neutral, what are you talking about? I ran 6 months of your route data through the model. The projections show a 14% improvement in on-time delivery rates. Projections. Based on historical data run through a spreadsheet against routes that don't look like they did 6 months ago because I've already been tuning them continuously for 11 years. What's your plan for the pharmaceutical chain of custody documentation? I asked. The compliance fields are columns in the master sheet, drivers input via form, and the DEA manifests, also in the sheet. There's a macro that formats them for submission. A macro, I said. It's been tested, Caden said. I thought about the 37-page DEA Form 222 compliance protocol I'd spent 4 months refining so that it would survive an audit without a single variance. I thought about the time in 2019 when one of our subcontractors fat-fingered a single field on a controlled substance manifest and we had federal agents at our Appleton hub for 3 days. I thought about the FDA warning letter we'd received in 2018, before my system was fully built, for temperature documentation gaps that nearly cost us our pharmaceutical operating authority. I thought about all of that, and I said, Caden, have you ever worked in pharmaceutical cold chain? I've studied the regulatory framework extensively. That's study. That's not doing. I turned back to Weston. The quarterly pharmaceutical compliance audit is in 6 weeks. You're talking about cutting over a new system on routes that have DEA manifests, FDA temperature logging requirements, and 3 hospital clients whose SLAs have liquidated damages clauses of up to $50,000 per incident. Caden will have plenty of time to get up to speed, Weston said. That's why we need you documentation and system access by end of next week. And my position? We're eliminating the senior logistics coordinator role as part of the consolidation. Pat has your severance package. Pat produced a folder and placed it on the table in front of me. She still wouldn't meet my eyes. I didn't argue. I looked at Caden, who was typing something on his laptop with the focused energy of someone who has never been responsible for anything going wrong yet, and I said, Caden, one piece of advice. He looked up. When the pharmaceutical audit happens, don't guess. If you're not certain the documentation is right, stop the run until it is. The find isn't the worst part. The worst part is when they put a flag on your DEA registration and every controlled substance you're carrying becomes a federal case. He nodded like I'd given him a helpful tip about parking. Got it. I drove home with my box of desk stuff in the passenger seat, coffee mug, a photo of my daughter's soccer team, a stress ball I'd gotten at an industry conference in 2015 that I'd never once squeezed. I should have felt worse than I did. Mostly what I felt was the specific calm of a man watching an unsecured load about to roll off the back of a truck, who no longer has any responsibility for what happens when it hits the road. They gave me 2 weeks to document everything. I documented what I could, which was the visible part of the system, the routing logic I'd built, the trigger thresholds, the client-specific protocol files. What I couldn't document was instinct. I couldn't document 11 years of watching the system fail in 100 different ways and patching each failure before the next one could compound it. You can write down that the Eau Claire loading door needs to be shimmed below 15 degrees. You can't write down the 37 other things like it that you've absorbed into your fingers and your decision-making and your 5 a.m. anxiety dreams. Caden shadowed me for 3 of those days. He asked good questions, actually. He was smart, I'll give him that. Smart enough to understand what I was explaining, not experienced enough to know how much he still didn't understand. He'd write things down on his iPad with the look of a student who's confident he's passing the exam. On my last day, I watched him import our full route data into his Excel model for the first time. It took 9 minutes to load. The file was 340 megabytes. When it finally finished, about a quarter of the cells in the temperature compliance columns were showing a formula error because his lookup range didn't account for route codes that had been added in the last fiscal year. "That's just a formatting issue," he said. "Okay," I said, and picked up my coffee mug. The first 3 weeks after I left were quiet. I caught up on some yard work. I reconnected with my wife. I started going to the gym again at a reasonable hour instead of 5 in the morning. I did not check my phone obsessively. I did not miss the 2 a.m. alerts. Then my former colleague Renata, who'd been a senior dispatcher for 8 years and was one of the best people I'd ever worked with, texted me on a Thursday afternoon. "Dale, something's wrong with the routing. Caden's system sent 6 pharmaceutical trucks on the same corridor today, and 3 of them hit road construction outside Janesville at the same time. They're backed up. Temp on one of them is climbing. He's been trying to reroute for 2 hours." I put my phone down, picked it up again. "Is the temp unit on that truck the 2019 Freightliner? Truck 34? Yes. That unit has a secondary cooling override on the driver panel. Physical toggle, not in any digital system. If the driver engages it within the next 15 minutes, it'll hold temp for another 90. Tell Caden." Long pause. "He says he doesn't see that in the documentation. It wasn't in the documentation. Tell the driver directly. His name is Sosa. He knows where it is. The temp held. The delivery made its window. The client never knew." But that was just the first one. Over the following 2 weeks, Renata kept me loosely informed. The way a friend gives you updates on a mutual acquaintance who's made some poor life choices. Caden's model was routing trucks optimally for distance, but it didn't account for the weight restrictions on 3 county roads in northern Wisconsin that I'd learned the hard way in 2017 when a driver got cited and we ate a $6,000 fine. It didn't know that one of our major grocery clients in Green Bay had a receiving dock that went to skeleton staff after 4 p.m. and would turn away a delivery even if you'd made your window. It didn't know that the Duluth Hub's night shift lead had a personal policy of double-checking medical shipments before release that added 40 minutes to every outbound run, but had caught 3 mislabeled packages in 3 years. Systems built by someone who's never run the routes always optimize for the things that are in the data. They don't optimize for the things that never made it into the data because somebody just knew. The pharmaceutical audit was in week 5. I know this because I got a call from Pat on a Friday afternoon and I could hear from the way she said Dale that she hadn't slept much. "I need you to know this is coming from me personally, not from Weston." "Okay." The FDA preliminary audit results came back. There are documentation gaps on 14 controlled substance manifests from the last 30 days. The DEA compliance form that Caden's macro was generating had been submitting with a static date field that wasn't updating correctly. Every manifest for 30 days has the same date on it. I sat with that for a second. A macro with a broken date field. 30 days of pharmaceutical manifests with identical, incorrect dates. What's the DEA saying? They're not saying anything yet. That's the problem. They flagged our registration. We can't move controlled substances until the review is resolved, and they're estimating 4 to 6 weeks. 4 to 6 weeks. We have 6 active hospital accounts with controlled substance deliveries on regular schedules. We have pain management clinics, a hospice provider, a surgical center. When we can't deliver, they have to find other carriers on emergency notice, and our contracts have penalties for supply chain failures. What about the hospital SLA accounts? 2 of them have already sent breach notices. The liquidated damages exposure is real. We're looking at potentially $200,000 in contract penalties alone, not counting the cost of the DEA review and whatever fines come out of it. I was quiet. "Weston wants to know," Pat said carefully, "if you'd be willing to consult, on a temporary basis, to help address the documentation issues." Weston wants to know, or Caden does. She didn't answer that. "Tell Weston I'll come back," I said. $25,000 as a consulting retainer, paid before I walk in the door. My daily rate is $2,500 after that, billed weekly. I report to the CIO, not to Weston or Caden. and Caden does not touch the pharmaceutical routing or compliance documentation until the DEA review is closed. Non-negotiable. Silence on her end. Also, I said, I want a written acknowledgement signed by Weston that the compliance failures resulted from the premature transition to an inadequate system. Not technical issues, not unforeseen complications. A specific factual acknowledgement of what happened. That goes to HR for the record. Dale, those are my terms. He has until Monday morning to decide. Weston called Sunday night. He accepted all of it. I walked back into the facility on a Tuesday. The parking lot looked the same. The lights were on in the dispatch wing. Renata was at her station, and she turned around when she heard my footsteps and said, "Oh, thank God." The server room felt like visiting a friend who'd been left alone too long. I could see what Caden had done and hadn't done. He'd left the original routing engine running in parallel. Credit to him for that. He wasn't entirely reckless, but he disabled 3 of the compliance cross-checks because they were generating what he described in the note as excessive alerts. The excessive alerts were there because they were catching things that needed catching. He'd muted the smoke detector because the smoke was annoying him. The DEA documentation issue was methodical to fix but painful. Every manifest from the previous 30 days had to be pulled, corrected with verified timestamps pulled from our GPS and temperature logging records, and resubmitted through the DEA portal with an explanatory cover letter. I spent 4 days on nothing else. The DEA reviewer assigned to our case was a thorough man named Novak, who had the energy of someone who enjoys finding paperwork errors, and he found 2 additional issues I had to address before he'd closed the preliminary review. The hospital accounts were harder. One of them, a regional health system with 3 facilities that we'd had for 6 years, had already found an emergency carrier and wasn't inclined to come back. I spent 2 hours on a call with their procurement director, a former Navy logistics officer named Marsh, who asked me precise, difficult questions about what had happened and how we'd ensured it wouldn't happen again. I gave him precise, honest answers. He appreciated the honesty more than the answers, I think. He agreed to a 30-day probationary reinstatement with enhanced reporting requirements. The DEA review closed in 3 weeks, not 4 to 6. Novak sent a closure letter that was cordial in the way that government correspondence is cordial when it has found everything it was looking for and is satisfied. Our pharmaceutical operating authority was restored. I ran the first controlled substance routes personally, checking every manifest by hand before submission. On the day I finished, I walked into the CIO's office, a woman named Berryman who'd been skeptical of the whole Excel transition from the beginning and had said so in an email that I'd been CC'd on and that Weston had apparently ignored. And I told her the system was stabilized and the documentation gaps were remediated. "What do you want to do going forward?" she asked. "That depends on what you're offering." She offered me my old role back at a 40% salary increase, a direct reporting line to her, and a budget for 2 junior coordinators so that the institutional knowledge I carry isn't housed in a single point of failure anymore. That last part was her initiative, not mine, and I respected her for it. I accepted. Caden was reassigned to a project management role supporting vendor contract renewals. It's honest work. It suits his skill set better than pharmaceutical cold chain logistics. I don't think he's a bad person. I think he was put in a position he wasn't ready for by someone who wanted to believe that ambition and a master's degree were a substitute for experience. That's not Caden's fault. That's Weston's. Weston is still VP of Operations. He's been quieter since the DEA review. He attends my quarterly logistics briefings now and doesn't interrupt. I hired a coordinator named Pryor, fresh out of a logistics program, smart and careful in the way that people are careful when they don't know everything yet. I'm documenting things properly now. Not just the visible systems, but the Eau Claire door and the temperature override on truck 34 and the 40-minute window at the Duluth hub and everything else that was living only in my head. It's about 90 pages so far and I'm probably a third of the way through. Renata told me last week that Caden stopped her in the break room and said he hadn't understood how complicated it actually was. That he thought he'd understood, but he hadn't understood. I appreciated that. It takes something to say that out loud. I still take the 2 a.m. alerts. I probably always will. Some mornings I pull into the parking lot at 6:47 and the lights are on in the dispatch wing, and I sit in my truck for a second before I go in just because I can. Because it's mine again. And because I know what it costs when someone treats it like it isn't worth taking seriously. Here's to knowing where the bodies are buried. Here's to the guys who actually run the routes. And here's to the 47 pages of documentation still left to write. Because the next time someone decides I'm replaceable, I'm going to make sure they at least have to work for it. I've been thinking about what actually happened. Not the DEA paperwork, not the hospital calls, not the part where Weston Farr had to accept every single one of my terms on a Sunday evening with the quiet of a man who knows he has no leverage left. I mean what actually happened. Underneath all of that, Weston made a decision based on what he wanted to be true. He wanted it to be true that 11 years of accumulated, hard-earned, failure-tested knowledge could be replaced by a 27-year-old with a master's degree and a spreadsheet that took 9 minutes to load. He wanted it so badly that he overrode every practical signal telling him otherwise. That's not a leadership failure. That's a character failure. There's a difference. Leadership failures are about strategy and execution. Character failures are about choosing comfort over honesty, about deciding that what you wish were true is close enough to what is true that you can act on it anyway. And Caden, I don't hold anything against Caden. I've said that before and I mean it. He was handed a position he hadn't earned by someone who had the power to do that, and he was confident the way people are confident before the real world has had the chance to test them properly. That's not a sin. That's just inexperience that hasn't met its consequences yet. The moment he stopped me in the break room through Renata and said he hadn't understood, that he thought he had, but he hadn't, that was the moment I knew he was going to be okay. Not at pharmaceutical cold chain, maybe not for a while. But okay, because that kind of honesty about your own limits is actually rare, and it's the beginning of the kind of competence that actually holds up. What I keep coming back to is this. I spent 11 years building something that worked, not because I was told to, not because there was a performance metric for it, but because I understood that 340 drivers and the few hundred hospital patients downstream of them needed it to work. That's the only real reason to be good at anything, because the thing you're doing matters to people who are depending on you whether they know your name or not. The concrete finisher in the original story, the nurse waiting on a medication delivery, the surgical center running low on a controlled substance because a macro had a broken date field. None of them know who built the system that affects their lives. They just know if it works or if it doesn't. I think about Weston sometimes, still in his VP role. Quieter now at my quarterly briefings. I think about the 90 pages of documentation I've written and the 47 more still to go. I think about Pryor, my new coordinator who asks careful questions and writes things down and admits when something doesn't make sense to her yet. She's going to be excellent, not because she was handed anything, but because she's doing the honest work of learning what she doesn't know yet, one careful question at a time. The cost of skipping that work, of pretending you've done it when you haven't, doesn't always show up immediately. Sometimes it waits weeks. Sometimes it waits until a federal regulator flags your DEA registration and 4 hospitals are scrambling to find emergency carriers. The bill always arrives. The only variable is when and how large it's gotten by the time it does. Here's to the drivers who run the routes in the dark. Here's to the dispatchers who've memorized which dock closes at 4 and which refrigeration unit runs warm in a crosswind. Here's to doing the actual work instead of just believing you understand it. That's the only thing that holds up when it matters.